Hi everyone, and welcome back to Ro is Reading. I participated in the 2026 Trans Rights Readathon, a yearly community readathon dedicated to reading books written by and featuring trans, non-binary, two-spirit, and gender non-conforming people. This year the readathon raised money for Point of Pride, which provides financial aid and resources to trans folks. Let's just jump in. We are going to be going day by day through this because that is the organization system that I feel like makes sense. Day 1 and 2. I actually didn't do any reading on day 1 of the readathon since I was busy, but I did pick up a probably socially unacceptable amount of holds from the library. I am super lucky to live in a place where queer books in public libraries aren't subject to any sort of banning or gatekeeping. If that's not the case where you live, there are online queer libraries such as the Virtual Queer Library and the Queer Liberation Library, both linked below. I think for one of these you have to have a United States mailing address to apply. The other one seems pretty open to everyone. Since I was in a super big reading slump this March, hence the recent lack of wrap-up videos, I decided to focus on exploring manga and graphic novels for this year's readathon. This ended up being a great way to explore a bunch of different genres, and as with any readathon, I am just super happy to have discovered a bunch of books to read that were maybe a bit off the beaten track. On day 2, I spent my afternoon at a local coffee shop. Wednesdays are my writing day, so I mainly focused on my story, but I read the first volume of Boys Run the Riot by Keito Gaku when I was taking a break. This story follows a trans teenage boy who ends up starting a fashion brand called Boys Run the Riot with a new kid in his class. Volume 1 is a pretty standard classmates meeting up and starting a thing storyline. In this case, they're starting a print-on-demand fashion line. It's a sort of plotline that I've read in some form about 800 times because of how common it is in books for young people, but it is a good vibe for me. I ended up reading all 4 volumes of this manga over the course of the readathon, so my full thoughts are going to be throughout the video. It was either in volume 1 or 2, there was a interview of the author in the back, and I especially liked that. I gave this one somewhere in the ballpark of 3 stars. I forget the exact one. Day 3. I had my first decent chunk of free time for reading this day and finished up Boys Run the Riot Volume 2. This ended up being my favorite volume of the series. I really liked how it followed Ryo, the main character's difficulty navigating a very gender role-based workplace as a trans boy. That said, in this volume, I was definitely noticing a pattern of characters just passionately monologuing to tell Ryo how he should be emotionally reacting, which would start to really wear on me by the end of the series. I gave Volume 2 4 stars. Next up, I read Stone Fruit by Lee Lai. It was not okay to make me cry so much during this. This book follows 2 women who love babysitting their niece, sort of running through the woods, digging up worms, that sort of thing. There was a lot of genuinely fun to read, imaginating with a child, like running around in the woods, looking for the imaginary white dog and pretending to be monsters, looking for keys, etc. However, the 2 women's relationship is hitting a rocky patch, and they need to reckon with their relationships to each other and to their families to sort of get through it and find a resolution. This is definitely one of those books where adults are reckoning with adult life, not having a clear through-line or plot, which does mean that the book itself doesn't have much of a plot outside the meaning the characters make and the meaning that you as the reader get from that, which isn't my favorite sort of story, but it is done incredibly well here. It made me really reflect on what the concept of showing up for someone looks in my own life, which is something I really needed to hear at the exact time I read this. So, 4 stars. I don't think ratings encapsulate this sort of book where everyone's going to take something different from what all these characters learn about themselves, but I am basing my donation amount on star ratings for this readathon, so yeah, I have to star rate them for better or worse. After reading Stone Fruit, I was pretty emotionally spent, so I picked up on the readathon the next day. Day 4. On day 4, I finished Chromatic Fantasy by H.A. The funniest book I think I've read all year. Just hilarious, Tumblr-brained, raunchy humor. This was my favorite book of the readathon, no competition. Chromatic Fantasy follows a trans man, Jules, who escapes from the nunnery that raised him, becoming a thief and setting free a lust god in the process. He quickly falls in love with Casper, another transmask thief, and their wacky hijinks and palling around and also processing their relative traumas cements their relationship as like one of the most interesting romances I've read in a long time. By the way, I should mention that this book has a lot of smut in it. I also made this Tumblr post in the course of reading this book, which the Realm of the Elderlings fandom loved because, Fitz-loved fans? Fitz-loved? I don't know. I like tomfoolery better as a ship name, and I stay saying it. This couple is the answer to the questions, what if Fitz and the Fool weren't so traumatized they couldn't communicate? And what if Robin Hobb was way less averse to depicting queer sexuality? At least in the mind of this slightly delusional gay Realm of the Elderlings fan. I don't even, think Fitz and the Fool are secretly banging the whole time, personally. I don't even want to sideline Molly as a character because sidelining her is low-key misogynist. Truly, I just love them as a literal destined couple who never have the terminology or emotional intelligence to actually be happy together. But that probably is a topic for another video. But yeah, let Jules and Casper fuck. I'm into this whole story. Also, the art is beautiful, and I will be buying this book soon. 5 stars. Days 5 and 6. Boys Run the Riot, Volume 3. A badly handled outing storyline. Woohoo! I'm really trying to hold space for these teen characters to be flawed and messy, but it is hard when the narrative is like, oh, but that worked out though, so it's fine, I guess. Yeah, I didn't like this one. I think I gave it 2 stars. And then I realized partway through the readathon that I had a copy of Black Flame by Gretchen Felker-Martin on my shelf. So see, graphic novel haters, I did read a heavy air quotes real book for this. I'm not in that bad of a reading slump. Black Flame follows a film restorationist in the 80s who is restoring a kinky Jewish film from Weimar Republic Germany called The Baroness in order to rehabilitate the restoration agency's reputation for restoring some super bigoted stuff. And it's a queer horror book. Obviously, the film is ultra haunted. Obviously, the main character is ultra closeted. The film history bits are really fascinating, and there is some hand-body horror that really lit up all my sympathetic pain receptors. The ending might be better or worse for you if you're more familiar with the film I believe it's referencing, but truly not sure on that. The Baroness is a film that needs to be seen to be believed. Does that reference make sense? Probably not. 4.5 stars. Day 8. On day 8, I got tonal whiplash after reading Black Flame by jumping into A Song for You and I by Kay O'Neill. It was incredibly funny to me that both books in wildly different genres used the trope of character asking trusted other character to cut their hair into a more affirming style. This is a middle grade fantasy graphic novel that reminded me of the fun school parts of Heralds of Valdemar. It follows a young ranger who is about to graduate from novice status to be a full ranger. However, they are struggling with their gender identity and really waffling over what name to carve into the post. Super relatable trans person fixation, by the way. I would never change my channel name and pen name multiple times for similar reasons. Their horse gets injured in an accident and they need to slow down, think, and interact with this annoying shepherd who plays the fiddle. This book was very cute and I respect the hell out of these flying horse illustrations. Horses are hard to draw, but the story kind of didn't resonate very deeply with me. And unlike YA, middle grade is a genre I very much enjoy. I gave this one 3.5 stars, but, at the end of the day, I do still appreciate that middle-of-the-road trans stories exist these days. So while I am a harsh star rater, stars kind of don't encapsulate too much. I genuinely hope this story made someone feel seen or helped someone understand their loved ones and community a bit more. Days 9, 10, and 11. I will admit I kind of fell off the wagon for a couple of days, but in my defense, The following book was definitely a harder read subject matter-wise, so I ended up reading it in chunks. Until I Love Myself Volume 1 is a manga memoir that follows its author, Poppy Pesuyama, through their experience of workplace sexual assault in 2013, their school life growing up non-binary, and their current struggles to love themselves. It uses non-linear anecdotes to explore how Pesuyama's feelings on their own gender and their gender dysphoria complicated those experiences. The discussion of how the passage of time and especially the Me Too movement have changed what is seen as harm in our society and how victims before that time period had to deal with so much they shouldn't have needed to put up with was incredibly engaging. I did, however, find this story a little all over the place without a clear through line. It was also really interesting comparing this series to Boys Run the Riot in terms of main characters' experiences with transness in their culture, because they are both set in Japan and written by trans Japanese authors. Japan has a different approach and understanding of transness to the USA, where I live, and it was good to learn about that from multiple sources. I did end up finishing volume 2 right before recording this video, and I liked that one as well. It has a very moving metaphor as its sort of central conclusion. 3 stars, but I highly recommend it. Day 12. Yeah, I didn't read anything this day. Day 13. I read a little bit of Under and Santi were here. Yeah, I felt no sense of urgency until day 14. Boys Run the Riot Volume 4. In my defense, I would have finished the series sooner, but I was waiting on a library hold to come in. Volume 4 follows the cast of the series as they put on a fashion pop-up and begin to gain traction in the fashion world and find themselves as people and designers. I'm very happy for the character success, but I did want far more character work than was really done in this series. 3 stars for this volume. Overall, I give this series a big old neutral-faced thumbs up. I read it. In some ways, it's a good thing, again, that there are trans stories that I am so decidedly neutral on being published and translated. So many times in the series, I was sitting there not loving it, and I started thinking about how much a story like this would have meant to Little Egg Row. Word of God, gender fluid Alana the Lioness blew my mind as a kid, and as much as I love her, parts of the series season have not aged well. At least Tamora Pierce isn't a TERF, though. All of this to say, every single year I do this readathon, I'm just amazed at the width of trans stories that exist nowadays. Reading right up to the bell, the last book I read was Green Fuse Burning by Tiffany Morris, which, full disclosure, I am unclear on whether Tiffany Morris identifies as trans, two-spirit, or indigiqueer, which I didn't realize until after it was too late to pick up another book. However, this was a really good book starring a queer Mi'kmaq woman, so I am still going to feature it here. Green Fuse Burning follows Rita, a mixed media landscape painter who has won an artist's retreat to a small cabin backing onto a swamp. She doesn't even really want to be there. She's reeling from the loss of her father and her own disconnect from her Mi'kmaq roots, and debating breaking up with her shitty girlfriend. Also, something decidedly freaky is going on with the nature here. I am giving this the, quote, book that uses my least favorite horror twist trope in a way that made me say, wait, yes, that's how to do that. That's what that should symbolize. Which puts the 2 quite mainstream horror books that I've hated because of their use of this sort of horror fully to shame. 100-page indie published book shows up trad published industry. I'll put a comment about that below if you want the spoiler version of this mini rant. I gave this book 4.5 stars. Epilogue. You were expecting me to just return unread books to the library? Okay, I do that all the time, but still, here's some final reviews. Though my rationale for picking up Breathe was mostly, Maia Kobabe has a new book out? Oh, let me put that on hold. I would describe myself as bind curious, and anyways want to support my friends and community members who chest bind, so this ended up being a very valuable read. Breathe is a series of illustrated interviews with trans people who chest bind, with resources on chest binding in the back of the book. I don't have much to say about this one. I liked it, as I often really like reading about people's lived experiences, 4 stars. And my singular audiobook from the readathon was Under and Santi Were Here by Jonny Garza, which I've been meaning to read for ages because I saw this author on a panel at Texas Book Fest a couple years ago, and they're super duper cool. That is also how I know that Under is a Sagittarius, if I remember that correctly. This book follows Under, a non-binary Latine muralist taking a gap year in their hometown of San Antonio before going off to art school. They meet and quickly fall head over heels for Santi, an immigrant from Mexico who begins to work at Under's family's taqueria. They're running through the city, getting to know each other, making kick-ass art, and their lives get complicated quickly by everyone's least favorite meltable water agency, ice. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars, mostly because I wasn't fully in the age demographic for this book, quite honestly. Somebody copy-paste my explanation of, I'm still glad this book exists and you should read it here. I was just the amount of age older than these characters, who were about 19 or 20, that I felt like I was invading their privacy whenever they were doing the typical early adulthood, horny, couple-y stuff, especially given that this book is otherwise so stylistically YA, but also, like, whatever. They can be horny if they want to be. That's a me problem. I also don't tend to like most romances that follow the romance formula. As a graphic designer, I loved watching Under wrestle with their artistic style, and I loved the sense of community that's so present throughout this book. Also really loved how this book tackles discussions of ICE and the bullshit that is, heavy air quotes, illegal immigration, especially in our current state of the world, though this has been a thing in my home state for many years. So, unlike Boys Run the Riot, this is decidedly a 3.5 star that is coming from different feelings on different story elements rather than overall indifference. So, that's all the books I read. Since I wanted to read so many books this year, I decided to donate $1 per star, which ended up in the ballpark of $45. Fundraisers are no longer up for the Trans Rights Readathon, but they do have a huge list of action items and other fundraisers that need support on their website right now, which I will link below. I am really looking forward to this readathon next year, and I hope you are too. Guess I should go return these books to the library. Also, like and subscribe. You know, the YouTube things. Thanks for watching Ro is Reading.